Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Winters, and here with Garden, and really excited to welcome all of you to our first ever community office hours this Wednesday, August 12th. And we're ready to get right to it. So here we go. Here's a quick agenda of what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to start with an introduction and some quick housekeeping notes. Then we'll go into a Garden 012 recap. We released Garden 012 at the end of June, and we'll spend some time focusing on a new feature in Garden 012, workflows. And then going to talk about what's coming next in Garden Core, our open source product. We have some sneak previews for you. And then lastly, we'll spend some time going over Garden Enterprise, which we also announced at the end of June. You probably have heard us talking about here and there. And of course, set aside plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So in case you're brand new to Garden, don't know who we are, what we do, here's some quick background for you. So the company was founded in 2018, and we're headquartered in Berlin, Germany, but of course we work with users and customers around the globe. And we build a Kubernetes and cloud native testing platform. We have an open source product, and as I mentioned, an enterprise edition as well. And quick housekeeping note, in case you're new to Livestorm. So if you have any issues with sound or screen share throughout the webinar, please use the chat tab in the Livestorm interface. And please drop in your questions for Q&A at the end in the questions tab. And that's, I think, everything you need to know. And lastly, would like to introduce the presenters today, the two people who are going to carry most of the rest of the webinar. So we have Jon, our CEO, and Thor, VP of Engineering. Both co-founders have been with the project for a very long time. And so you may have seen their names in the community Slack channel, answering questions, and hopefully excited to get to put some names and voices, faces and voices behind those names. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jon to take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Hello, everybody. For today, we wanted to just quickly go over some of the new stuff that we have released. So both in the 0.12.0 release and in the last couple of releases after. I will also cover a couple of things that are in the pipeline, pretty far along in review, etc. Because I realize it's as we keep adding new and new features, some of them are kind of like minor usability tweaks that are easy to miss. So I wanted to show them in action and hopefully give you some useful tips on how to use Garden and how to leverage these things. So I think the highlights in 0.12 were probably, workflows, and my colleague Dote will demonstrate those in more detail. Faster startup is a community favorite. Basically, we now cache certain things as you start Garden commands, and makes using small invocations of Garden much more fluid and much faster, and basically reduces a lot of friction when using Garden in your day-to-day, especially if you're not just using it in watch mode. We've made several improvements to our templating, and I'll cover some of those in my demo, and made some improvements with respect to configuration management. That and a bunch of other things, but I think, we needed to pick a few highlights. And with that, I think we'll start by covering the workflows. And
yes, all right. So workflows, just to give you a very brief summary off the top, they're a way to define a sequence of steps, which can both be Garden commands or custom scripts. And these essentially are our take on, for example, a CI pipeline, except one of the differentiators is that you can run your workflow from your local dev machine, possibly in the same cluster as in CI, so you can test things out as you go and have access to sort of all the power of your integration tests and all of your full power setup before you commit. Go to the next slide. So just drilling down a little bit more, workflows are a new top-level config type, like modules and projects. So you define the steps of a workflow in the configuration, and each step is either a Garden command, like deploy or test or run task, or a custom script, which is basically a shell script, which, as we'll see later, has access via template strings to outputs and other things from the previous step. So you can feed things from the steps from the step commands into the scripts. So let's just dive right in and see what this looks like. I'll just share my screen here. There we go. Can everybody see my screen? Yes. All right. So on the left here, you can see that I've written a couple of workflow configurations. You can also see here on the bottom left-hand corner that I'm making use of a new feature, which is that we now support custom config names. So you can have a prefix. So there's this file here, workflows.garden.yaml, which lives alongside the project level garden.yaml. Anyway, so this workflow here on the left, intake test, it runs the db-init task, which you have to find here, which is basically a task that populates the database with test data. We print some stats in the db-init step as a way to demonstrate that you can access the outputs of previous steps. Then we run the integration tests, and then we clean the database of all test data after we're done. So here on the right-hand side, you can see that the workflow is executing. This is done via the new run workflow command. So you just run the workflow by name. And as you see here, in step number 2, we're interpolating the module version and the duration of the task run in milliseconds, just as a trivial example. A more realistic example of using script steps would be, for example, to maybe download some files or prepare custom authentication, and maybe closer to the end of the pipeline, you might publish artifacts or do any more custom things like that. But by being able to pipe through results from commands and script steps into the other steps, you have quite a bit more power to play with. And another thing to note here is that all of these steps are using the same Garden context, which means that this runs significantly faster than it would if this were just a bash script that ran Garden run test db-init, then a script, and then the integration test and so forth. And it's also important to note that if you have workflow set up in your project, you can run this thing from CI simply as set up some environment variables and just do Garden run workflow by workflow, and there you go. So you can also this makes it much easier to test and debug CI pipelines locally, because you don't have to rely on the CI system for the whole thing. Going to the next slide. Let me see. Mike, could you share the slides again? There we go. Just to recap, some of the use cases for workflows, and as an extension of what you can already do with the base Garden commands, is using a script step early in the pipeline to download files and maybe download some binaries, do some custom auth configuration, running tasks before or after tests. Because currently you can't have tasks depend on tests, nothing can depend on tests. So this gives you a bit more flexibility like that. And then at the end, if you have some custom logic for publishing artifacts, whether it's a Docker image or test artifacts, you can just put that right in there. Yes, I think that about covers it.
Yeah, I think so. With that, and by the way, so if you have any questions, please post them here if you like. And as always, we're on the Slack, and very happy to walk through more use cases and talk about what you're trying to achieve. But yeah, so what I wanted to talk about is both a few things from the previous releases, but I also wanted to touch on some things that are in the pipeline. So what's next up, and this is partially in review already, actually, and I will demonstrate it here, are some improvements that we've been doing with respect to our dashboard. So we built a dashboard fairly early on in the open core, but it has this rather frustrating limitation that you need to have a Garden command running that is a watch command. So like Garden deploy watch or Garden dev, and that keeps the dashboard running. But we're finding that a lot of our users, they don't do that. They're not watching for changes in their repos, and they much prefer to run their commands ad hoc. So you'd like, run a specific garden build or garden deploy or, garden test, etc. So what we've done now is set the dashboard up in such a way that it runs as a separate command that you can keep running alongside any other garden commands that you already run. So just this, what was technically a somewhat complex change to make, but from a UX standpoint, a pretty straightforward one. We hope will make the dashboard much more usable. And as a continuation of that, we plan on adding options to your project configuration so that you can customize the dashboard to some degree. You can add tabs to the dashboard. We will add a few providers that really are focused on just adding stuff to the dashboard. For example, we want to add an Octant provider, which Octant is this Kubernetes management web UI, so that the dashboard can become this place where you put a lot of your tools, and you can then share that with your whole team, and not have everybody using separate tools or installing them separately. So we're quite excited about the progress on that front, and look forward to adding more and more features on that over the next couple of weeks. And another big thing that's coming up, and I'm aware that we've talked about this for a long time now, the plugin SDK, but we're making some strides there, and now is the time. So I'm personally putting in a lot of work on that. We've been spending a lot of time figuring out the design of it and figuring out how to make it easy enough to use, so that our users can fairly trivially add plugins to their custom plugins to their own projects, as well as creating plugins that you share with other people. And I think even just the use case of plugins, like custom plugins for bespoke plugins for an individual project, I think will come in really handy. You can make customizations to module types. You can create custom ones from scratch. There's an inheritance mechanism so that you could, for example, make a tailored version of the container module type that removes some options, adds some new ones, whatever your team needs. And then going forward, we are also excited to support more deployment platforms. As you may or may not know, Garden isn't architecturally coupled to Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is just a plugin, albeit a big and complex plugin for Garden. But we could totally imagine supporting other container-based platforms like Fargate and Cloud Run, even Lambdas and things of that nature, so that you can mix and match these within a single Garden project. But that's, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the kind of the big idea with the plugin SDK. I don't have that to show you at the moment, but in turn, I will start by showing what we already have implemented. Some of these things are going to be in the upcoming release. So now, where do we go to? Enable screen sharing. There we go. See, here we are. Everybody can see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So I have here a little example project that I made earlier today that kind of showcases a few of these different configuration options. So we have it is yet another variant of our like the Docker vote example. The first thing you might notice here that my colleague mentioned earlier, we now support multiple Garden configurations in the same folder and custom naming of them. So I'm kind of, you may or may not want to do this for every single Garden YAML in your project, but I'm doing it here to just kind of make the point. And it may actually be nice, instead of looking for Garden YAMLs with the same name in multiple folders, I can now just go project.garden.yaml in my editor and find the right configuration pretty quickly. And there's no opinion in Garden on what you name these files, but we would suggest something like naming your project file, project.garden.yaml. Similarly with workflows, you would put them in a separate file. If you only have a handful of modules, you could maybe have a modules.garden.yaml here. Here I have a single module that doesn't really have any files, so it doesn't really need a folder of its own. So here's just a postgres.garden.yaml. And I think this will make it a little bit easier to organize projects and gives you a little bit more flexibility. So secondly, I wanted to mention that in an upcoming release, this is already merged and is in our Edge release, we now support variable files that are in YAML or JSON format. And this allows you to make them a little bit more flexible with respect to their structure. Like previously, you would have this .env format, which is just a simple key value list. But here, we can make complex objects. And what I'm going to show you here is, like, here I have a common set of environment variables that multiple modules in the project use. So before I go any further, I'm just going to quickly deploy it. So we can kind of walk through. I'll let this run while we wait. There won't be anything new here. Oh no, what have I done? This teaches me to edit stuff right on the edge here. So, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to do this. Here, this should do it. I'll come back to this. I was making an example for a specific feature. I'll come back to that. So you can see here the cached provider statuses, which were holding up the deployments a lot of the time, reduced the weight quite a bit. You can see it walking down the dependency graph here. We have a handful of services. Here is like a simple API server, like a Python backend. What I want to point your attention to here is, and I'm not sure like everybody's aware of, you can actually put, this, like the format of env is a mapping, like this one here. But you can actually put in, you can template in a whole object. So here I'm referencing this thing here, which is in my var file, where I can keep like, secret strings like username, password, and so on and so forth. But what then if I have other environment variables that I also want to add for this particular module? So here we can see how we can now combine different objects. So I can have a common set of environment variables and then add other ones on top. And I can even override the ones that are in the shared one. So it's this special merge key. And this is basically like an object spread. It can be anywhere in the configuration. So I could just as well have some variables on top here, and then depending on the order, that basically decides the order of precedence. So I could have a default value on top of it, and then have this overridden, or the other way around. This should give you plenty of flexibility and allow you to reduce some duplication in your variables. We use Garden ourselves to develop Garden Enterprise, which we'll mention later. And we, in using that, we notice that we have all these different environment variables that we share across all these different modules. And we quickly were burdened with a lot of copy pasting, and we much prefer it this way, where we can kind of reduce the complexity and just reduce all the boilerplate, make it all a little bit cleaner. Lastly, so I wanted to, like, on the whole variables thing, I wanted to come back to this. So we now also support so let me maybe reduce the size here a little bit. So here I have fashioned a little task called PSQL, which allows me to just call PSQL in a cluster, and if I want to run some command in there. It has some required arguments that I will always need to input. Then I'm putting in a little trick here, which is referencing a variable that may or may not be defined. So it defaults to just nothing, or a double dash, which has effectively means nothing. what this effectively allows me to do in combination with this var parameter. So if I go and run task, so let's see. What I want to do here is run PSQL in the cluster with this particular argument. And what this will effectively do is call help on PSQL in the cluster. Not particularly complicated. What I can do, I can then also run whatever other command, I can list the databases. I can run a specific PSQL command, and this is a handy way to reduce some of the boilerplate. And if you have ad hoc tasks that you want to, run, kind of abstract away from the developer, this is a handy tool to do it. Another usage example could be, for example, you could have another variable which is just, say disable worker, and then you could interpolate that into the worker manifest, the worker module, and toggle with the disable bar that disable worker, and basically disable the module if you have this value set to true. Things of that nature, and it's useful for kind of small things like this, and it avoids you having to go into the project config, edit it for something that's quite particular to a specific command invocation. Now let's see. Now I wanted to lastly show. This is still in testing, so I hope it doesn't break. Here we have the new garden dashboard command. The garden dashboard command, quite simple. It will start a dashboard here, and this, should be familiar. This will query for the status, list the services, and I can access a stack graph here. But what's nice about this is that you can just leave this running and go about your business. So here, if I, for example, go and garden deploy, and just to kind of illustrate, I'm going to force deploy and force build. So I trigger that. Click back here. We should see this come alive. There we go. So all the events from other garden commands will be propagated to the dashboard like this. That means basically, yeah, you can leave it running. You can view the logs in the dashboard, and it will stay up to date because it receives events from all the other commands that you have running. And simple enough change, but should make the dashboard much more useful. I've started using it a lot more, and I'm quite excited about expanding the work on the dashboard. And yeah, I think that is about it, and we can keep going, Mike.
Well, actually, we had a couple of questions come in about your update, and so I think I might just put you on the spot, and we can answer them while we're on topic. So first has to do with plugins. So will creating a plugin involve writing JavaScript or TypeScript, or I guess more generally, what's involved in writing a plugin?
So the first iteration will be TypeScript, yes. Well, TypeScript being optional, it will be JavaScript, but we will provide a TypeScript SDK. We have designed it in such a way that we will be able to create other types of SDKs, and I think the next two on the list would be Bash and Go. So sometimes you just need to run some shell scripts, and it could be as simple as that. The plugin architecture allows for this, but we will start with the TypeScript one because that's what everything's currently written in, and we will port some of our own the current plugins that are baked into the open core right now, and basically separate them out into a separate package.
All right, and the other question is from another part of your demo, asking if it's possible to have multiple merge keys. And if you look in the chat window, you can see an example.
Let's see.
Yeah, so two merge keys in the same, two spreads, so to speak.
I'm gonna turn off my screen sharing. I think. So you can't have two side by side, but you can nest them. So you can have a merge key within a merge key, and that's there's unit tests for that. So you should be able to achieve what you want to do with that.
All right, great. Then I think we're ready to move along. The next slide, and on to Garden Enterprise. Back to you once again.
So you may have noticed on our website, we've alluded to this here and there, that and we sent out a newsletter that we announced a new commercial product. Garden Enterprise is built on top of the open core. It is not a fork or a different version of Garden as it is today, but it's rather a new service that you would generally deploy within your infrastructure. So say in your VPC, even on-prem, it basically runs on Kubernetes, so it can run anywhere that Kubernetes does. And what that gives you is a persistent service. So unlike Garden, which is like a CLI you run from your development machine or you run it from your CI pipeline, this provides a persistent service that collects, similarly to how the dashboard does now locally. It collects events and logs from every environment. It collects environment statuses. It allows you to hold secrets, so you can define secrets, and that you can then easily template into your project configuration. You can scope them to different projects, individual environments, even individual users. It provides a layer of team management as well. And perhaps not least important, it allows you to connect directly to your VCS, i.e. GitHub or GitLab. So basically responding, you might have actually noticed when we were looking at the workflows, there was a triggers field in the workflow config. And that basically refers to Garden Enterprise, and it's a Garden Enterprise only feature for now, where it can listen for version control events, like when you create pull request, and automatically spin up an environment. You can then view that in this admin UI. You can look at the status of different tests and workflows and services. You can see when it was last updated. You can delete environments from there, which is important because sometimes we end up with lots and lots of sprawling environments, and it's good to have a single place where you can view them all. You can see logs from workflows there. And yeah, so I think there's a little bit too much to cover for this particular session. And we do have a plan on giving out more and more demos of this. But for now, we would love it if you are at all interested. We would love it if you just contact us. You can ping us on the contact form on our website. You can ping us directly on Slack, whatever is convenient. And we're happy to chat about it, give you a quick rundown, and see when we can fit you in. We've, it sounds like something you just say, but we are actually working with a few customers, so we're slightly backed up. But I know I see a lot of our loyal users, and you've been in for the ride for a little while, and we'd love to just talk about it and see if it's useful for you. And we're also happy to get people giving it a spin. Yeah. Am I forgetting to mention something super important at this point?
No.
I guess I would just add, one tiny addendum to the enterprise thing is that just like I was talking about earlier with workflows, that you can run them locally or from CI. Is that when you're logged into Garden Enterprise, things that you run from your local machine as logged in also show up on in the UI. So we're also following this, this philosophy of things you run yourself are also first-class citizens in the system.
Oh yes, that's a very good point, because we realized that if you already have an elaborate CI setup, and even if, whether you've been using Garden before or not, it may be preferable not to use this VCS integration. So any command, basically it's the same way as my little dashboard demo there. Wherever you run your commands from, the status will be reflected in the Garden Enterprise UI. So you can keep using your CI pipelines, whatever is convenient for you. But I figure if you haven't been using Garden in your CI, it can be handy to just have Garden take care of it. But if it's already in your CI, it'll just work as before. The only difference is you provide like an ID and the domain of your enterprise cluster, and it will pipe data to there. So and we'll be able to then retrieve secrets from there as well. So yeah, lots of flexibility. I think that's one thing that we've learned over the last couple of years, that our users need quite a bit of flexibility. So whatever is easiest for you, we definitely want to accommodate that. But yeah, so then what we described here is kind of the starting point for this product. There's lots of things that I don't know how much ahead of myself I should get in talking about all the things that we have planned for this. But you know, it's easy to imagine, like once you have all this data coming from all your different environments, there's lots of interesting things that we can do with that. There will be features for enforcing policies on projects, so that you can, if you have multiple projects, you can be sure that certain policies are applied across your organization. Basically anything that can really benefit from having a central place where that has visibility into all of your garden projects. Yeah, we're just getting started with this, and very much looking forward to where it takes us.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. And this next slide is mine. So as of today, we opened up a really short survey. You can see the URL on the screen here, but don't worry, we will include this URL in a follow-up email that contains the recording of the webinar and also post it in Slack. But if you want to check it out early, there it is. And so just hoping to learn a bit more about how everyone's using Garden. And actually, one of our goals is to try to build up our use case library and get a better sense of what real-world Garden deployments look like, and hopefully even turn some of these into case studies or joint webinars or joint blog posts, whatever the case may be, because we think that users who are coming to the project, getting started, could use some concrete examples of how Garden is solving problems within other organizations, just to help them sort of make sense of what it can do. And so anyway, yeah, we'd love for you to take the survey, and we'll leave it open for a couple weeks at least, just to give everyone a chance to respond. And as mentioned on the slide, to keep it interesting, we will draw the name of a respondent to win a pair of very nice noise-canceling headphones.
The same ones I have, I highly recommend them.
Yeah, they're fully endorsed by Jon. And so anyway, an essential for home office or wherever you're working, and some Garden swag as well. So yeah, you can check that out at any point. It's live now. And with that, we're on to Q&A, and I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for a bit and turn off my camera just so you don't have to see me squinting as I read questions that have come in. So I'll be a talking Garden for a minute. Yeah, so we have had some questions come in throughout the webinar, and had some come in through signups as well. And so actually, there was a question about the dashboard related to performance. So we have a user who has well over 100 modules, sometimes seeing performance issues with the dashboard where it's not responsive. And so curious about if we're looking into that.
Not as much as we should have. So we've generally been addressing performance issues with just big Garden projects to begin with. But I think there's more that we can do. I think this is, yeah, I can see where the question is coming from. I would love to just have a chat about it. We also need to just make these like massive example projects so that we can try and get at these performance issues. I think that the dashboard, yeah, to be candid, needs a fair amount of love. And this is one of those things that we probably need to address before it becomes useful for you. It's probably, yeah, I just like knowing how it's architected is probably just rendering every single thing, and that becomes a lot once you go past, like, I don't know, 50 or 100 modules. I
mean, we have addressed some performance issues around a very large project recently, but as Jon says, we have been giving the dashboard as much attention as we should, as we're going to be doing in the next few weeks. I think it's, it's time to level up the dashboard, and part of that's going to be performance improvements.
Exactly. So, and I fully expect, like, now that we, as we make it more usable, we get more users wanting to use it. So please don't hesitate to give us feedback like this. This is something that I honestly hadn't really gotten to in this project yet, but is exactly the type of thing that's going to come up if we make it a little bit more central to the whole Garden dev experience.
All right, great. So back to some questions that came in during registration. So we have a question about using Garden with GitPod and how the two might work together. So anything you can say to that effect?
Well, so we haven't started work on it, but I have had a conversation with the founders of GitPod and know a couple of people there, we're just generally interested in seeing where that goes. I think actually, just in relation to this whole dashboard thing, I would love to be able to see GitPod in there, and conversely, I would love to love for users to be able to log into GitPod and have Garden kind of work out of the box there. To some degree, it's a matter of just making usage examples and giving it a go. But it's come up. We haven't quite timelined it yet, but I'm definitely interested in that, and just generally, like, GitPod and others kind of going the last mile and having these remote development environments that fully describe your system, so you should be able to just like log in somewhere and be up and running. That's kind of the whole idea, and we're coming in from one direction, they're coming at it from another. So I think once we get to it, it'll be a happy marriage.
Very nice. And on the topic of integrations, there was also a question about whether we have an integration with Telepresence or have thought about that.
We haven't integrated, but we have used it. I think was it Eythor who was using it, or was it somebody on our team who was kind of giving it a spin?
I use K9S quite a bit, but I haven't used Telepresence.
Yeah. So basically, it works without an integration, but I guess we just kind of paused that we weren't quite sure what the integration would do. Very much open to ideas, because Telepresence solves a problem that we don't want to resolve. So I'd much rather integrate with a tool like that. It would just be good, actually, just if you could ping us and kind of walk through how you're using Telepresence today, and then we can get the wheels turning and see what sort of an integration would make sense. And as I would expect it to just be kind of like a little wrapper that pre-populates some parameters and makes it easy to kick off a session. Yeah, just open to it. Haven't prioritized it yet, but I think some real-world user feedback would make it much easier to actually do.
Okay. And we had a couple more integrations-related questions. We'll come back to those, break things up a little bit with a question that just came in the chat related to workflows and how they're similar to GitHub Actions and Tecton pipelines, for example. So how would we compare them? Maybe, Dottie, you could take this one.
Yeah, so what I would say there is that in comparison, with workflows, you can pipe things together in a way that the steps can be aware of the outputs of the other steps, in a way that's kind of, there's a clear schema. So I think it sort of facilitates feeding data between the steps. And of course, it's Garden aware, and probably it's probably simpler to compose most of the pipelines that you'd want. Less kind of imperative programming. It's more declarative. So,
yeah.
I mean, it accomplishes similar things in some ways, but yeah, I mean, maybe you want to pick up on that.
Yeah, I'm wondering like how best to compare, so Git of Actions. They're a little bit more ad hoc, I guess. I frankly haven't used them enough to kind of fully grok how I would compare these things head to head. Same with Tecton pipelines, but I think I mean we also use Git of Actions, and we haven't used Tecton pipelines. We just use these things for different things. I think the nice thing about workflows is just the fact that, like Dottie mentioned, they are Garden native. They have some facilities like for the templating between the different steps. I think I would use workflows for sequences of garden commands, and anything else that isn't really garden related. I think it's totally fine to use Git of Actions for what they're good at, and Tecton pipelines as well. If you have Garden Enterprise, maybe you would be tempted to move more stuff over to, because you would have the direct VCS integration. You would maybe be tempted to use less Git of Actions and more like Garden workflows, but I think they have different strengths. Git of Actions probably are a little bit more lightweight and rapid. Garden workflows maybe a little bit for, larger runs of things. We have yet to it would actually be interesting to see the performance comparison, like, how quickly these spin up.
Yeah.
But I'd say, use them in combination by all means, and see what suits you. It would actually, now just thinking out loud, it would actually be quite good to have a good Git of Action example where we trigger a Garden workflow, because it's just running a command from a container, and we have container images for Garden. So I think, use whatever is the most comfortable for you. I think maybe you would hesitate to use both Tecton pipelines and Garden workflows, because the Tecton pipelines are slightly more involved. But it's all opinions, really. And I think just the fact that it's Garden native makes it more useful if you're using Garden a lot.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And we had another workflows question come in about running workflow steps in parallel. So use case is, have you seen that question? Dottie, you want to take that one as well?
Yeah, so
all right, cool.
So let me see. Let me just actually, I think it's pertinent for me to share my screen here real quick. Just going back to the triggers here. See here that when there's a pull request, we'll trigger the inspect test workflow and the unit test workflow. So the idea here is that, like, if you want to, let's say in this case, you want to run the build and the test in parallel, you would just create one workflow for each. Like, a workflow only happens sequentially, but if you want several workflows to happen at a time, you would just set up a trigger for, set up triggers so that all the workflows you want to run on that VCS event are scheduled at the same time. But if you want to do this in your own CI system, that will basically consist of, like, setting up one action or whatever for each of the things, and each one of them will run a separate workflow. The workflows are essentially conceptualized as linear right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that. So if you run, say, Garden test, and each of your tests require that all of your services are up and running, and for that you need them to be built. You don't have to run Garden build, then Garden test, and then Garden deploy. You can just go Garden test. It does occur to me that it would be kind of nice to have a command for test and deploy. I don't know if whatever verb we would pick for that, because I think that's a fairly common use case. But a lot of the time it's implicit if you have tests that require stuff to be deployed. If your tests don't require stuff to be deployed, I think it would be good to have separate workflows for each.
Mm-hmm. All right. Cool.
And they shouldn't step over each other in most cases. But yeah, I think we basically within the command steps we leverage the graph, but we deliberately don't have yet another graph in the workflows, because then you may be better off just using the current primitives as opposed to the sequence of steps.
And I just add one more note that if you want to run a few workflows in parallel where they could be stepping on each other's toes, you might be able to use separate namespaces for the workflow so that they kind of have their own sandboxes. Like, if you're, yes. So that's one way of getting more sort of logical concurrency available, is that, like, if the two things are logically independent, but they could be modifying the same runtime resources, then that's one thing to consider, an option.
Yeah, but yeah, I think this is a super valid question, because
yes, it is, yeah.
I think, like, it occurs to me that there's a couple of little enhancements that we could make to make it a little bit more efficient in certain cases.
Yes, and we definitely, if anybody has feature requests or ideas about, tweaks to workflow syntax, we're all ears.
Oh yeah, and like, we've gotten a few already. We just in this release we're adding a skip boolean that you can so you can conditionally skip steps, and yeah, we could just as well add more features. It's just good to have some clarity on what people are running into and what people are actually using it for.
Yeah.
Cool. So another question that came in beforehand was, do you actually use Garden with a smiley face? Maybe a bit of a challenge there, a little tongue in cheek, but I think we can take it. So
yeah, I mean, so I think it's okay to note that we haven't been using it like to build like a proper production system for as long as we perhaps should have. We've been, we've actually, like, a lot of the features that have come up over the last few months have come out of us using it in a much more, big real world system, which is the Garden Enterprise part. We do use Garden to develop Garden Enterprise, and run into every possible problem. Although we actually don't run into that many problems anymore, which is super nice. We come a long way. But rather, any usability issues, like, like all these little different things that, these configuration management things that we just kind of start grinding against. And that has been super helpful for us. It makes it all a little bit less theoretical. That said, up until then, we've gotten so much good feedback from our users that, we've been not been wanting for ideas or suggestions on things to do, but it's actually it does remind me, we had at some point talked about, I think we have kind of a list of webinar ideas. We'd love more of those, by the way. So we're going to do these, Mike, is it monthly?
Yeah, so actually, I think we might try to do these more informal community chats once a month, and also once a month do a more structured, maybe tutorial style, how to do X in Garden or Garden 101, for example, or a joint user webinar where someone talks through their use case. So yeah, gotcha. 1 to 2 a month on average is what we're aiming for.
Yeah, okay. So I think, so I think one of the ideas on our little short list was maybe just kind of walking through how we actually develop using Garden. I think we're okay to do that, and that would be pretty fun. I mean, we can just kind of walk through, like, how we do our kind of day-to-day development workflows. Something that, to some degree is a little bit personalized. And we've been kind of, figuring out good, efficient ways to do testing, etc., and rapid iteration. I've seen my colleague here have some nice tricks with respect to, like, rapidly running integration tests, and that would actually be, that would be great to just kind of do like a little real world use case.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We definitely learned, like, we use different parts of Garden for different components, and it might be interesting to share kind of, the us fitting the cloth to the, to measure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that would be a good idea. But please do send us any ideas for topics to cover in these events. Like, it will always be a mix of announcing what's new and, kind of walking through, like, use cases for stuff that we've been building and what's in the pipeline, but it's good to interleave with, some, usage tips and things like that. And it's also super handy to get, like, questions ahead of time, like we did now. Got a few so we can cover stuff in a little bit more detail.
All right. So another enterprise-related question. We had a question about pricing, and I know that we don't want to share specifics because, just to be frank, like, we're still early in the process, and I think we have a model that works well, but could change as we progress with customers and have more customers and learn that we need more flexibility or something different. However, I think, Jan, it'd be okay to share the general unit that we're using and how we're thinking about it right now, just to give some clarity.
Yeah, sure. Basically, so yeah, this is like an enterprise thing. So we do annual contracts, and the kind of the minimum unit is a single project and our single team. And if you have more projects, that stacks up. And if you have lots of developers, I think I hesitate to say how many developers are included per project, because we were kind of bouncing that number around a little bit, but that's kind of the logic of it. So if you need additional developers per project, there's a small price on that, but the main unit is basically project. Yeah, I'm happy to have a conversation about the pricing, but we're not quite ready to release a price list. We will at some point.
Okay.
But for now, it's in the contact us, which I think is familiar to everybody. But we try and make it reasonable.
All right. Very good. So we have a little bit of time. We'll just take it to the end. I'll go back to questions that we haven't gotten to yet. And yeah, so next one, a question about SonarQube and Garden, which I think has come up a handful of times. We're talking to new users and customers. So what are your thoughts there? What's the state of SonarQube with Garden?
Just exploring it. I think we've been looking at several different of these kind of security scanners, like vulnerability scanners, and the different types of whether it's network security, like static analysis of policy enforcement, things like that. We have the conf test plugin, which is good for validating policies on Kubernetes manifest and things like that. But SonarQube, comes up. Yeah, it's actually come up in several of these sales calls, and it's in the same vein as Twistlock, which I think maybe has changed his name now, and the Aquastack stuff. But it is something that we're really interested in, and one of the things that we're kind of going for is you don't want all the security stuff to happen. You merge the master, you're trying to push the production, and then you hit the roadblock. And actually, no, you didn't meet the security requirements. You want this to be surfaced quite early in the process. And if we can weave it into the developer experience, all the better. I think, you could treat whatever security scanning, whatever validation that you need to perform, policy matching, as just another one of your kind of unit/integration tests. So it's something that we're definitely thinking about. Would love to get a few more data points from our existing users on what they are using, just so we can kind of figure out what to prioritize and what to try out first. But it's on our, I'd say, medium-term roadmap to do stuff like this.
I would say, Jon, just repeating a point that you raised earlier today, that one of the goals of the plugin SDK is to enable us to weave in as many of these dev and test phase tools into Garden, so that you don't have all these different entry points, that you can tie it all together with a bow using Garden. So it's not just about supporting different kind of fast providers or different container orchestrators, whatever. It's also about bringing in all the tools, because Garden has the sort of the whole sort of dependency context.
Yeah, exactly. Bringing all this stuff into the stack graph, basically.
Yeah, basically.
I think, I for sure, having a plugin SDK out there will make it easier to collaborate with both the community and all these different vendors on integrations. And I think, obviously we will kind of bootstrap and work on some of them ourselves first. But yeah, that's kind of that's a big part of the vision for it, is to connect the dots more.
Yeah.
Yeah, security definitely. In my mind, we talk about cloud native testing. That's kind of the phrase you see on our website now, and that, in my mind, should include all these different concerns, not just testing your actual code, but how it's set up, dependencies, and all kinds of stuff. So we want to rope more of these tools into that process as we go on.
All right, cool. And there's actually just one last question that we haven't gotten to yet, unless any come in at the last minute. And let me see if I can, let's see, phrase it. Okay, so somebody is starting to look into browser testing frameworks at their org, and it sounds like Cypress is the front runner, and just curious to know how they might use Cypress with Garden.
Like any other, like, if you have JUnit running or like Mocha or Jest or whatever, like you just use it the same way. Just build it into a container and run the test from there. It is really as simple as that. It would probably be nice to have an example or a blog post on it, but that's what it boils down to. It's and the nice thing being, like, you can, same for any other integration test, you can declare a dependency on the UI, which then has dependency on a bunch of other things, and so you would automatically trigger these end-to-end tests, or like the browser tests, which are commonly called end-to-end tests, I guess, as part of your Garden workflows.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and that goes for like Cypress or any of the other ones. There's a bunch out there, but yeah, Cypress is nice. We've used Cypress.
Yeah. I mean, like as you said, like it's not something that we integrate with, but it fits quite well into the core sort of core verbs.
Yeah, we don't really strictly need to have an integration for it, but it's fairly easy to use.
All right, cool. So we're coming up at the end of the hour, and so I'm gonna show the wrap-up slide, sadly. But just a few quick notes here. If you want to stay up to date with upcoming webinars and things like that, we have a newsletter. We try to send just one email a month, and that's it. And you can subscribe on our website in the footer. If you have questions about Garden Enterprise, you can go to garden.io/contact. There will be an automated email in the next 24 hours or so with the recording and also a link to the survey. And I'll try to get the slides up in PDF form as well. And we are hiring. And so if you're interested in working on Garden, check out join.garden.io or send us an email. There's a contact email address on the /contact page as well if you just want to get in touch with us, not to talk about Garden Enterprise. So yeah, I think that's everything we've got.
Just on the hiring note, so like even if you're not like personally looking for work, if you know somebody who think might be a good fit, we're looking for primarily just a backend engineer to work on the product and a solutions engineer to work on implementation with customers and in a more customer facing role. So yeah.
All right. Cool. And yeah, the last thing I'll say once again is that if you have ideas for webinar topics or tutorials that would be helpful, we're going to be trying to do this on a regular basis. And so ideas are always welcome. And yeah, we'd love that kind of input. So you can find us on Slack, again, email, Twitter, wherever we are. And we're happy to hear from you. So I think that's everything. Thank you so much. I'll turn my camera on so I can say goodbye. Thanks to everyone who joined us live, and great job, Jon Dotti. And yeah, we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
All right.